All right, so we are back in our demo project. I'm sorry, we are. Before we can continue with Spring, we need to learn about a principle that Spring uses pretty heavily. So it's going to be helpful to just talk it over a little bit here. So this principle is called dependency injection. You'll see what it is shortly, but essentially, the short version is it's a different way to control the creation of different objects or structures that you're going to use throughout your project. So I've added the dependency injection framework we're going to use here. It's called Juice. Google made it. It's very popular. You see it all across the industry. Lots of people use it. Spring has its own dependency injection framework, but they're all pretty similar once you get the base understanding of how it works. Um, so I got this from Maven as well. The Maven repository is basically where all of the packages for Java that are publicly available live. Um, so you see we have this Maven Central repository up here. That means that we can pull any of these projects from Maven Central. Additionally, I added the AWS SDK. If you're not aware of what AWS is, it's a cloud provider, and essentially they provide different services in the cloud. So the DynamoDB enhanced client is what I want from AWS. This is just some package versioning stuff, but I want to access this client, and I want to use dependency injection in order to access it. So I've created this folder called Juice here. We're going to create a module in there called credentials module. We're going to have this extend module, abstract module, which means essentially we are identifying this credentials module as an abstract module. Is its own thing, but it's also something else. It's like the square rectangle thing, where every square is a rectangle. Every credentials module is an abstract module, but not every abstract module is a credentials module. That's essentially how the logic works here. So we're going to create a function that provides credentials. This function is going to return an AWS credentials provider, and it's going to return the default credentials provider. Um, and yeah, we have this set up so that if you call this method, you get the default credentials provider. But in order for a juice to actually mark this as usable, we need to add two annotations. Provides, which signals this is a provider method, and singleton, which means there is only going to be one instance of AWS credentials provider, and that's going to be this. Um, yeah, so that's our first module. For our second module, these are mainly separated for organization. Um, we'll have another thing that is an abstract module. We're going to have another provides here. We're just going to have it provide a DynamoDB client, which is essentially just something that does operations on DynamoDB, this cloud service that we know nothing about. So we're going to have this return DynamoDB client. Do return DynamoDB client. Instead of doing create here, we're going to do builder credentials provider, which means we need to add a credentials provider, and we're going to hit build. So you can see we're missing the credentials provider from here. This thing wants a credentials provider, so we're just going to ask for one in the constructor of this, the AWS credentials provider, and then we're going to put it. So we want essentially this method to be called to get the credentials to be put in here. And what Juice does, and these dependency injection frameworks do, is they will automatically set up this wiring for us so that that credentials provider is put in here. Imagine if you had a whole slew of these like clients that each require this credentials provider. You can just ask for it in the constructor, and Juice will give it to you. You don't need to do all of that manual wiring. Um, okay, so we have our two clients, and now, or two modules, excuse me, and now we need to create a third module for our whole operation here. So we're going to call it runner module. Not very fancy, but gets the job done. This is also going to be an abstract module. And instead of doing what we did before, we're going to override this other function called configure. And configure essentially allows you to add other modules to this module. It does a bunch of things, but that's what we're going to use it for. So we do install, then we're going to say credentials module. We're also going to install the DynamoDB module. So it essentially adds all of the declarations and the provides of the other modules into this module in this order. So you need to do the credentials module before the DynamoDB module, because in order to ask for the credentials, they need to already be provided for somewhere else. Cool. So now we have that all set up, and we can go back to our main method, and we can say, okay, I want to create something called an injector, which essentially is a like holder of all of our classes that where we can ask for anything that's been defined. So we can do juice.create injector runner module. Create that right there. So now we have our injector. And now we can ask for the DynamoDB client from the injector by doing get instance. And then we say the class type that we want. And there we go. We now have access to this DynamoDB client from being created inside of this juice stuff. And this may look pretty overkill for what we for what we're trying to do, but a lot of companies use this for like over for organization essentially. It essentially makes it easier to do that. So, okay, this ignore these SLF4J things, but this process finished with exit code 0 means it's successful. But what if we try to ask for something that's not in the injector? So I don't know. Let's just try to ask for a region. So AWS, there are tons of different regions, and we're going to say, okay, we might want to provide a different thing called a regions module that provides whatever region we want to operate in. But we don't have it set up yet. So what is this going to do if we ask Juice to get it for us? So essentially, it's going to give you this nice fancy error that says no injectable constructor for types region, which essentially means you didn't define it. But there's no, like, you can't see any, like, compiler error from, or, like, compiler error from when you say to get these things. So it's a little bit of a trade-off where we are pushing off we're saying, okay, we can declare all of this stuff in this nice structure and get at it whenever we want easily from this injector. And we don't have to pass tons and tons of values around to do that. But the trade-off of that is that if you ask for something you don't have, you have a problem. So it's kind of a little trade-off there. But yeah, this is the intro to Juice, and we will get back to Spring.